Forced to quit school to care for siblings, I escaped. Now, my family hunts me, threatening to kidnap. Hey everyone, I'm Valerie. I never thought I'd end up sharing my story like this, but here I am, typing away in the middle of the night in a room that isn't mine, in a house that feels more like a home than anywhere I've ever lived. I guess I should start from the beginning. I'm the eldest of 7 kids. Yeah, you heard that right. 7. My family has always been on the tighter side when it comes to money, but we made do, or so I thought. My parents have always been the hard-working sort, the kind who sacrifice everything for their kids, or at least that's the story I grew up believing. As the oldest, a lot was expected of me from a young age. Babysitting, house chores, you name it, I did it. I didn't mind at first. It felt good to be responsible, to be someone my siblings could look up to. But as I got older, things started to change. I had dreams, you know? I wanted to finish high school, go to college, maybe study engineering. I loved math and science, subjects that made me dream of a future beyond the walls of our cramped 3-bedroom house. But everything came crashing down the summer before my senior year. My parents sat me down at our old, worn kitchen table and laid it out plain and simple. Money was tighter than ever, they said. They couldn't handle the younger kids and work at the same time. Childcare was out of the question. It was just too expensive. They needed me. They needed me to quit school and take care of my brothers and sisters full-time. Just until things got better, they said. I remember feeling like the room was spinning. Quit school? My future, all my plans, were supposed to just pause because of money? I tried to argue, to plead my case. I talked about scholarships, about part-time jobs, anything to keep my dreams alive. But it was like talking to a brick wall. They laid on the guilt thick. How could I be so selfish, think only of myself when the family was struggling? Didn't I want to help my siblings have a shot at a better life? It was manipulation, clear as day now as I think back. But then, in the moment, with their disappointed stares cutting through me, I caved. I agreed to quit school and became what they needed me to be, an unpaid nanny, a surrogate parent, trapped in a life I didn't choose. And that's how my senior year started, not with excitement and plans for prom and college applications, but with diaper changes, helping with homework, and trying to keep a house running while my own dreams collected dust in the corner of my mind. But as the days turned into months, something inside me refused to settle. The unfairness of it all, the theft of my future, it started a fire inside me. I began to plan, quietly, determinedly. I wasn't going to let my story end here, not like this. And that's when I decided it was time to run. After that crushing conversation at the kitchen table, life became a series of endless days that all blurred together. Wake up, feed the kids, clean, help with homework, repeat. My life was on loop, and with each passing day, the weight of my lost dreams grew heavier. But beneath that weight, a plan was slowly taking shape. I started squirreling away money from the odd jobs I could do from home. Freelance writing, selling crafts I made during the rare quiet moments at night. Every penny went into a secret account I managed to open online. It wasn't much, but it was a start, a glimmer of hope that I clung to fiercely. Then there was the matter of my documents, my birth certificate, social security card, and school records. I knew I couldn't leave without them. One afternoon, while the twins were napping and my parents were out grocery shopping, I rummaged through the file cabinet that held our family's important papers. My heart was pounding as I found what I needed and tucked them safely into my backpack, hidden under a loose floorboard in my room. As the months passed, my escape plan became more detailed. I reached out to my Aunt Lucy in secret. She was my mom's younger sister, and we'd always had a special bond. She'd moved to another state years ago and occasionally sent me cards on my birthday. When I called her and told her what was happening, there was a long, heavy pause before she spoke. "Valerie, I always worried they were asking too much of you," she finally said. "You're welcome to come live with me. I'll help you finish school." We planned everything meticulously. I would leave in the early morning when everyone was asleep. Aunt Lucy would drive halfway to meet me at a bus station near the state line. The night before I left, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, torn between guilt and a fierce desire for freedom. I wrote letters to each of my siblings, telling them how much I loved them and explaining why I had to leave. I left the letters where they'd find them after I was gone, hoping they'd understand someday. When the house finally fell silent in the deep hours of the night, I slipped out of bed. My bag was light, just the essentials. Moving silently through the dark house, I felt a mix of fear and excitement pulse through me. This was it. I reached the back door and paused, my hand on the doorknob, taking one last look back at the home that had been both my haven and my prison. Then, With a deep breath, I stepped out into the cool night air and closed the door softly behind me. The walk to the bus station was the longest of my life. Every shadow seemed to watch me. Every noise made my heart skip. But when I saw Aunt Lucy's car pull into the parking lot, all the fear melted into relief. I ran to her, and she hugged me tight, no words needed. "We'll figure this out together," she whispered as we drove away from the life I knew, towards something uncertain but filled with new possibilities. And just like that, I was free. But as we drove into the rising sun, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. My parents wouldn't let me go that easily. The first rays of dawn were breaking across the horizon as Aunt Lucy and I crossed the state line. The light seemed to symbolize a new beginning, but my stomach churned with a mix of excitement and anxiety. As we drove in silence, I couldn't help but replay the escape over and over in my mind. The quietness of the house, the weight of the backpack, the cool night air. It all felt like a dream now. But it wasn't a dream. It was my new reality. Aunt Lucy had a small but cozy house in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where everyone had a garden and people said hello to each other on the street. It was a stark contrast to the cramped, noisy life I'd left behind. She showed me to my room, a small space with a window overlooking the backyard. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and it was safe. I remember setting down my bag and feeling a profound sense of relief wash over me. The first few days were a whirlwind of activity. Aunt Lucy helped me enroll in the local high school to finish my senior year. Walking into a new school, halfway through the year, was terrifying. I felt like everyone could see right through me, like they knew I was the girl who had run away from her overbearing family. But I kept my head down, focused on my studies, and slowly, things started to feel normal again. I made a few friends, joined the robotics club, and even started tutoring math on the side. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of my own life. But just as I was starting to relax, the past caught up with me. One afternoon, as I was leaving school, I noticed a familiar car parked across the street. My heart stopped. It was my mom's car. Panic surged through me as I saw her get out and start walking towards me. She called out my name, her voice a mix of anger and desperation. "Valerie, we need to talk. You can't just disappear like that. You're coming home with me now." My steps faltered, and I felt frozen on the spot. How did she find me? I had been so careful, or so I thought. As she approached, I could see the determination in her eyes. This was the mother I knew, the one who didn't take no for an answer. "No, Mom. I'm not going anywhere with you," I managed to say, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm staying here. I'm finishing school, and I'm going to college." She scoffed, a harsh, bitter sound. "And who's going to take care of your brothers and sisters, huh? You think you can just abandon your family because you want a different life?" "It's not about what I want. It's about what I need," I replied, my resolve hardening. "I need to do this for me. I can't be your unpaid nanny forever." The conversation escalated quickly. She tried to guilt me, to pull me back into the role I had played for so long. But I stood my ground. Passers-by began to notice, stopping to see what the commotion was about. Feeling the eyes on her, my mom's tone shifted to pleading. "Valerie, please, come home. We miss you. Your dad and we're sorry. We'll figure something out, just come back." But it was too late for apologies. Too much had happened, and too much had changed. "I'm sorry, Mom. I have to do this. For me," I said, before turning away and walking back into the school building, leaving her standing there. That night, Aunt Lucy and I sat down and discussed what had happened. She agreed that it was best for me to stay, and we decided to take extra precautions. I changed my phone number, and we even talked about getting a restraining order if things escalated further. The next few months passed in a blur of schoolwork and college applications. I was accepted into a good university with a scholarship in engineering. It felt like my dreams were finally within reach. But the shadow of my family's disapproval loomed large, and I knew that the battle wasn't over yet. One evening, as I was studying in my room, Aunt Lucy knocked softly on my door. "There's a letter for you," she said, handing me an envelope with no return address. I opened it cautiously, and my heart sank as I read the words. "We know where you are. You can't hide from us forever. Come home, or else." It was unsigned, but the message was clear. My parents weren't going to give up that easily. The fear that I had pushed to the back of my mind came rushing forward. What would they do next? How far would they go to drag me back into the life I had fought so hard to escape? As I lay in bed that night, the weight of the unknown pressed down on me. Despite the freedom I had gained, the threat of my past haunted me. a stark reminder that my fight for a new life was far from over. The letter was a stark reminder that my newfound sense of security was fragile. I lay awake that night, the words echoing in my mind, each threat unraveling the delicate fabric of my calm. I had escaped, yes, but the shackles of my past life clung tightly, woven with threats and manipulation. Aunt Lucy saw the fear in my eyes the next morning and insisted we take action. "We need to be proactive, Valerie," she said firmly as we sat at her kitchen table, the morning light casting long shadows across the floor. "It's not just about hiding away. We need legal protection." That same day, Aunt Lucy arranged for me to meet with a lawyer, Mr. Henderson, who specialized in family law. His office was a small, unassuming building downtown, the walls lined with books that smelled of musty leather and wood polish. Mr. Henderson was a tall, gentle man with a reassuring smile, but his eyes were sharp, missing nothing. As I explained my situation, he listened intently, occasionally nodding or jotting down notes. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, his fingers tented in front of him. "Valerie, what you're dealing with is a form of coercion and emotional abuse," he began, his voice calm and measured. "You're legally an adult, and you have the right to choose where you live and what you do with your life. Your parents have no legal grounds to force you to return." His words were a balm to my frayed nerves. "What about the threats?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "We can file for a restraining order against your parents," he suggested. "It would legally forbid them from contacting you or coming near you." I hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. A restraining order against my own parents. It felt so final, so severe. But Aunt Lucy squeezed my hand, her gesture wordless, but filled with encouragement. With a deep breath, I nodded. "Let's do it. I need to protect myself." The process was quicker than I expected. Mr. Henderson filed the necessary paperwork, and within a week, we had a court date set. The thought of facing my parents in court, possibly even testifying against them, was daunting. The night before the hearing, I hardly slept, my mind racing with anxiety and doubt. The courtroom was cold and sterile, the air thick with tension. My parents were already there when we arrived, sitting stiffly on the opposite side. Their faces were drawn, tired. Guilt gnawed at me, seeing them like this, but I steeled myself. This was about my future, my freedom. Mr. Henderson was a calming presence beside me, providing quiet reassurances as we waited for the judge. When the time came, the proceedings were surprisingly brief. Mr. Henderson presented the evidence, including the threatening letter and records of my parents' previous attempts to coerce me back home. My parents didn't have a lawyer. They spoke on their own behalf, their voices shaky, trying to explain their actions as out of love and concern for me and the family. The judge listened patiently, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was firm. "The court recognizes the autonomy of Miss Valerie Carter as an adult. The actions of her parents, while perhaps rooted in concern, crossed boundaries that are protected by law. I am granting the restraining order." Relief flooded through me, mixed with a poignant sorrow. Outside the courtroom, my parents tried to approach me, but the bailiff stopped them. Their eyes were filled with a mix of sadness and anger, and for a moment, I almost regretted my decision. As we left the courthouse, Aunt Lucy wrapped her arm around my shoulders. "You did the right thing," she murmured. "It's not easy, but it's right." The legal victory brought a measure of peace, but it was tinged with a sadness I couldn't shake. My family was broken, perhaps irrevocably so. I wondered if there would ever come a day when I could look back and not feel the sting of that division. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into my studies and college applications, trying to build the future I had fought so hard for. But the shadows of my past were never far away, lurking just beneath the surface of my new life, a constant reminder that the battle for my independence was far from over. Life after the court's decision was a strange mix of relief and ongoing tension. I was legally protected from my parents' direct interference, but the emotional weight of our fractured relationship lingered heavily. The restraining order was a piece of paper. It didn't erase the years of manipulation and control, nor did it silence the echoes of familial duty that haunted me. As the weeks turned into months, I settled more into my routine with Aunt Lucy. School was a welcome distraction, and my grades were excellent, a testament to the freedom and support I now experienced. I immersed myself in preparing for university, the promise of a fresh start in engineering driving me forward. However, peace proved fleeting. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when the false sense of security shattered. I was leaving school, lost in thoughts about an upcoming exam, when the unexpected sight of my uncle's car by the school gates jolted me back to reality. My heart sank. The car was unmistakable, a relic from my past that I never hoped to see again, especially not here. I paused, my initial instinct to run, but then I saw him, my uncle, approaching with a strained smile. "Valerie, your mom and dad are really sorry. They just want to talk. They're waiting nearby. Let's just go see them, huh?" The casual tone of his voice didn't match the urgency in his eyes. It was clear this wasn't a spontaneous visit. This was planned. My stomach churned as I realized this could be an attempt to take me back home against my will. "I can't, Uncle Mike," I said firmly, stepping back. "You know I have a restraining order. You shouldn't be here." He sighed, a sound of feigned exasperation. "Come on, Valerie. We're family. Family doesn't need restraining orders. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be." His attempt to persuade me was persistent, but I stood my ground, shaking my head. "No, I'm staying here. I'm not going anywhere with you." It was then that the situation escalated quickly. My uncle's demeanor shifted, his feigned patience snapping. He reached out, grabbing my arm with a firm grip, trying to pull me towards the car. "Enough of this nonsense, Valerie. You're coming home." Panic surged through me, adrenaline kicking in. I struggled against his grip, my heart pounding. "Help! I don't want to go with him!" I screamed, hoping someone nearby would hear. Luckily, a few students were still around, and their heads turned at my shouts. A couple of teachers who were supervising the after-school activities rushed over. "Is everything okay here?" one of them asked, eyeing my uncle warily. "No, he's trying to take me against my will," I managed to gasp out, still trying to pull away. The teachers immediately stepped in, one of them pulling out their phone. "We're calling the police," they declared. My uncle, realizing the situation was spiraling out of control, and now a public spectacle, released his grip and stepped back. "Valerie, please, let's just talk about this," he tried again, but his tone was desperate, knowing he had lost any control he thought he had. The police arrived quickly, and after I explained the situation and mentioned the restraining order, they detained my uncle. He was taken to the police station for further questioning. I was left shaking, the aftermath of adrenaline leaving me numb and cold. This attempt shook me to my core. It was a stark reminder that my fight wasn't over. The restraining order was a temporary shield, but it couldn't change the deep-seated beliefs my family held about duty and control. That night, Aunt Lucy and I discussed increasing security measures. We changed the locks, installed security cameras, and I started carrying pepper spray. Aunt Lucy suggested maybe even moving to a new location, but I was determined not to let them drive me away from the life I was building. The days that followed were filled with a mix of determination and dread. I was more vigilant, always looking over my shoulder, wondering if or when they would try again. The incident was a painful revelation of how desperate my family was to pull me back into the fold, regardless of my own desires. After the attempted kidnapping, my life seemed to shift into a permanent state of high alert. The school increased security at my request, and Aunt Lucy was never far from my side. We even started attending self-defense classes together, an activity that became less about bonding and more about survival. Despite these precautions, the fear of what my family might attempt next lingered like a shadow. The weeks following the incident were a blur of anxiety and determination. I threw myself into my studies with even more fervor, if only to keep the creeping dread at bay. College acceptance letters began to arrive, each envelope a beacon of hope, a tangible sign of the new life that awaited me beyond the confines of my current struggles. However, the brighter my future seemed to shine, the darker the backlash from my family grew. Despite the restraining order, the threats continued, now coming in untraceable forms: burner phones, anonymous emails, and even letters with no return address. Each message was more desperate and threatening than the last, painting a clear picture of the lengths my family was willing to go to drag me back. Aunt Lucy and I sat down with Mr. Henderson again, this time to discuss more drastic measures. "It might be time to consider relocating," he suggested, after reviewing the latest round of messages. "A fresh start could give you the safety and peace you need to truly move forward." The thought of leaving everything familiar was daunting, yet it also offered a certain appeal. A new city, a new life where no one knew my past, where my family couldn't find me so easily. But the decision wasn't easy. It meant leaving behind the few friends I had made, the school that had become my sanctuary, and the fragile sense of stability I had started to rebuild. "We don't have to decide right now," Aunt Lucy reassured me one evening as we discussed the options. "Let's see how things go. Maybe it'll die down. Maybe they'll move on." But deep down, I knew better. The family I had grown up with wasn't one to give up. Their concept of family bound them to me in ways that were suffocating, their love conditional and controlling. As graduation approached, the reality of my situation grew more pressing. One evening, as I sat poring over scholarship applications for schools far from here, Aunt Lucy knocked softly on my door, a concerned look etched across her face. "Valerie, there's someone here to see you," she said, her voice tense. Standing up, I followed her to the living room, my heart pounding in my chest. To my surprise, it was not another threat or a family member come to drag me back. It was a detective from the local police department. "Miss Carter," he began, his tone formal yet sympathetic, "I'm here because there have been developments regarding your case. Your family has been under surveillance due to the severity of their actions. We've intercepted communication that suggests they might be planning something more direct." His words sent a chill down my spine. "What kind of communication?" I asked, bracing myself for the answer. "It seems they're considering hiring someone to bring you back forcibly," he disclosed, watching me closely to gauge my reaction. The room spun around me, and I felt Aunt Lucy's hand on my shoulder, grounding me. "What can be done about this?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear I knew she felt. "We're increasing surveillance on their end and offering you police protection until we can sort this out. I strongly advise you to reconsider your living arrangements for the time being," the detective explained. That night, after the detective left, Aunt Lucy and I had a long, hard discussion about our next steps. The walls I had once found comforting now felt like a trap. The decision was heart-wrenching, but necessary. Within a week, we packed up our most essential belongings and moved to a new city, leaving behind any traces of our previous life. The move was disorienting, a mix of liberation and loss. We settled into a small apartment, our new surroundings unfamiliar and yet not unwelcoming. I enrolled in an online university program, a compromise that kept my academic goals alive while maintaining my safety. As I adjusted to this new life, the past continued to haunt me. Though the threats had stopped, the damage was done. Trust, once broken, was hard to rebuild, even more so when it came to family. I struggled with the guilt of leaving, the sorrow of lost connections, and the fear of what might still lurk in the shadows. Yet, in this uncertainty, I also found a resilient spirit within myself. I had escaped, survived, and I would continue to thrive, regardless of the challenges. The finality of cutting ties with my family was a painful chapter to close, but necessary for the peace and freedom I desperately sought. As I share this story, I realize now more than ever that while some wounds might never fully heal, the strength to move forward comes from facing the unknown with courage. My journey is far from over, and though the future is uncertain, it is mine to shape. No longer defined by my past, I step into tomorrow ready to embrace whatever comes, carrying the lessons of resilience and the hope for a better life.